Welcome to Toasty Gaming, where today we'll talk about all there is to know about Assassin's Creed Shadows. Ubisoft's market research has really messed up on this one, because as it turns out, trying to put a black person into a game set in Japan during the late Sengoku era wasn't exactly a major PR success. In almost every language, any piece of AC Shadows content Ubisoft releases is successfully disliked into oblivion. But does all of this actually mean that the game is bad? In this preview I will try to judge the game based on gameplay we've already seen, as well as other infos Ubisoft has provided, without getting too much into the entire Yasuke debacle, because this is a topic for another video. Before we start talking about AC Shadows itself, it is important to take a look at the developer of this title, Ubisoft Quebec. By looking at their past track record with Assassin's Creed titles, we know how high our expectations for AC Shadows should be. And as it turns out, they should be really low. Ubisoft Quebec's previous titles, AC Syndicate and AC Odyssey, aren't exactly known as the best entries into the AC series. The story and the parkour were bad in both games, and the gameplay was quite bland and mediocre. Although it seems that Ubisoft Quebec's team is mostly taking inspiration from AC Syndicate, as both the two main protagonists as well as the grappling hook are features that were first introduced with Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Theoretically, this is a small drop of hope for AC Shadows at least turning out halfway decent, because AC Syndicate was the last classical Assassin's Creed game and most fans are starving for the series to return to its original roots. The comments made by some of the developers also almost give reason for optimism until you actually see AC Shadows content or hear any other comments made by Ubisoft staff for that matter. Karel Oné, the lead producer for AC Shadows, acknowledged in a recent interview with Games Industry that people were very disappointed with Valhalla and that he understands that AC Shadows has major expectations to fulfill. Sadly, it seems like Monsieur Oné is the only person at Ubisoft who understands the importance of this title, as the rest of Ubisoft staff is busy beefing over DEI in games with Elon Musk and other such useful endeavors. Honestly, it really seems like Ubisoft's employees don't understand that they will all be unemployed if AC Shadows isn't the biggest gaming success of 2024. It doesn't matter what you think about DEI, if my job depended on a game's success and if I actually cared about the high expectations of my fans, I would spend every waking moment trying to deliver the best possible experience to them, instead of starting random beefs on Twitter. But before we get too sidetracked, let's sum up what we know about the developers of AC Shadows. First, they are responsible for two of the worst entries into the series, and second, they seem to be extremely left-leaning Canadians. Not exactly a flattering description, but at least they had more time than ever before to create AC Shadows, namely a whole 4 years. Of course, if you are sitting on the toilet, constipated, the result will still be shit no matter how much time you spend in there, and sadly the same thing goes for AC Shadows, so let's take a look at what we already know about the game, starting with its graphics. Based on what we know so far, the graphics are the best thing about this game, which doesn't mean all that much. AC Shadows, nonetheless, has beautiful graphics. It's clearly a major step up from AC Valhalla, particularly if you pay attention to the forested areas in the beginning of the gameplay reveal. You will notice what a major step up it actually is. You will see that there is much more shrubbery, the forest feels much more natural and much more dense. In addition to this, we also have a new weather system. The rain, when you have the infiltration by Naue towards the end of this gameplay reveal, you will see how she's sneaking in this castle area, and you have a light rainstorm beginning. And there's just a few drops falling and a light wind moves some bamboo in the background. And then fluently throughout the game it turns into a really pouring rainstorm, and you have liters of water just pouring down, and the strong winds are moving the bamboo brutally from one side to the other, and it feels and looks very atmospheric even when you just look at the weather. Sadly, nothing about the gameplay feels atmospheric or about the music, but at least the graphics are atmospheric, which is at least one positive I can mention. And in addition to those improved graphics, we will also see a new physics system. We will, for example, have rolling fruits if a basket is destroyed. It isn't really all that impressive, but it's at least an improvement. And we have also been promised, which is far more impressive, that there will be a physically correct cutting system like in Metal Gear Rising, although we haven't seen that in action so far. It is also important to point out that the gameplay trailer still had quite a few graphics glitches, but hopefully Ubisoft will manage to iron those out before they will actually release the game, although I'm not sure whether this will happen because it's Ubisoft we're talking about. The only real weakness I noticed with the graphics are the characters. Their faces look weird, particularly Naue looks weird. It could also just be bad character design, but I don't think so, because I noticed it with quite a few characters, and my issue is that whenever they talk, their face doesn't seem to move with their lips, if you catch my drift. What I mean by that is that Nao is, for example, moving her mouth, but nothing else in her face moves, and this makes her look very weird because it's like looking at a puppet, like looking at a wax puppet that has a fixed face, it can't actually move, and then just moves its mouth based on some kind of mechanism or something. It makes the characters seem very mechanic, robotic, almost like some kind of evil androids from a 1980s sci-fi movie or something. This is clearly an issue because if you want to tell a good story, having such bad and stilted facial animations will be a major problem in making us actually feel the same thing that the characters are feeling. Nonetheless, this is the only real major positive that this game has, its graphics. Now, after we have talked about the only true positive of the game, let's move on towards the first major negative, which is the game's story. The story seems horribly bad and unbearably bland. Although in the beginning of the little gameplay trailer there seems to be some intelligent world building going on. People gasp at the sight of Yasuke coming into town, some bow, some move away, pointing their fingers at him. And Ubisoft also states that people obviously have never seen a massive black samurai in Japan before and that they are supposed to react accordingly. And theoretically Yasuke could also serve to be an interesting story character, being a warrior from Africa, we don't know from which nation or tribe exactly, caught by the Portuguese and in service to Oda Nobunaga as a samurai. But this potential is immediately wasted because Ubisoft abuses Yasuke as a mere diversity hire. This already shows in the fact that they didn't even bother fleshing out from where in Africa he originates, as it makes a major difference whether someone is from the Kingdom of Ardra in West Africa, the precursor of the Kingdom of Dahomey and therefore most likely also a comparatively brutal slavery state, or from the Sultanate of Air, which used to be a comparatively peaceful, trade-oriented nation. Obviously a warrior from either of those countries would be very different in their worldviews and in their behaviors. Yet it overall seems like Yasuke isn't even an African. He seems more like an African American. I also draw this from the fact that he wears this weird hairstyle, the dreadlocks. It is uncommon for any sub-Saharan peoples to wear dreadlocks. They are a particular invention of North Africa, from the Egyptians in particular. Therefore, it is almost impossible, not just almost, but 100% impossible, that an African from the sub-Saharan region would actually wear dreadlocks, as this is not a hairstyle that is worn in this area. Therefore, I fear that we aren't just looking at an African character, we're looking at an African-American character who has been isekai'd into Sengoku-era Japan, despite African-Americans not even existing at this point in time. This doesn't really make me hope for a particularly good story, honestly. Anyways, if Yasuke's unclear background isn't enough of a reason for doubt, the last slithers of hope for smart world building are immediately destroyed once Yasuke opens his mouth. Both he and Naoe consistently speak in empty phrases. It is infuriating, honestly. Not a single thing of substance was said during the 20-minute gameplay reveal. Of course, it is not easy to show a compelling story in just a short reveal, but Assassin's Creed, the series that gave us characters like Ezio Auditore or Haytham Kenway, has certain quality expectations to fulfill when it comes to story and characters. And how does Ubisoft live up to such high storytelling and character building standards? Well, Naoe had her family murdered, very original, and Yasuke seems to just be a big dumb brute. To illustrate how a master-crafted Assassin's Creed story looks in 2024, we should continue following the little narrative of the gameplay reveal. Now that Yasuke has arrived in the little village, he is guided to a random old lady who talks about how evil the tax collectors are and how the daimyo is almost as corrupt as the average influencer who provides a positive Star Wars Outlaws review. Being understandably outraged by such hitherto unseen levels of corruption, Yasuke immediately goes out and assaults some random tax collectors based on the old hag's testimony. Now, in all seriousness, as Yasuke enters the village, he actually comments on how large the harvest seems to be with one of his many empty phrases. So, despite the preliminary evidence pointing to the contrary, this old lady tells him that the village is being oppressed and in a very bad state, despite the harvest being so good. Does our famous samurai actually bother to investigate the old lady's claims? Does he at least try to behave in a way befitting a samurai in the service to Oda Nobunaga himself and attempt to talk to the local daimyo? Does he maybe make use of our second main character Naoe and ask her to secretly investigate the daimyo's quarters while he occupies him with a conversation or something along those lines? Of course not. What are you thinking? Ubisoft clearly believes that black people aren't particularly bright and naturally prone to violence. Accordingly, Yasuke just goes out to fight some random people on the street. He doesn't even stop for a second to question what he has just been told. He doesn't even think of the potential ramifications if a samurai in service to the daimyo Oda Nobunaga assaults tax collectors in service to another daimyo. Anyways, he just goes out and assaults the tax collectors, who are by the way also led by a fellow samurai in direct service to the local daimyo. Understandably, Yasuke is asked what the hell he is doing and who he thinks he is by said samurai. After all, he is currently creating a major diplomatic incident. Now, in Japanese culture, when two samurai meet, you would expect a certain level of minimal respect between the two people, maybe a mutual bow or something along those lines, but obviously not in Assassin's Creed Shadows. Instead of anything sensible, Yasuke merely answers with the stoic phrase, "For the people, I am justice." It's a cool phrase, dude. Of course, it won't help once every other daimyo in the country turns against your liege because his samurai seem to be randomly attacking the territories of other daimyos. And I hate to point it out, but you have known those people for maybe about 5 minutes, and the random hack has probably lied to you, so most likely they just consider you a big dumb brute. Nonetheless, Yasuke easily finishes bringing justice to the people by killing some random soldiers who were probably just doing their job. After all, gathering taxes isn't evil, and when I assaulted a tax clerk with a katana recently, it was attempted murder and not bringing justice to the people. But what do I know? Naoe now finally makes her appearance by stabbing a random soldier in the back and immediately suggests murdering the local daimyo, like the well-adjusted, rational, and not at all clinically insane person that she seems to be. When Yasuke shows some concern for her safety while she murders the daimyo, of course, I would be more concerned for the reputation of my daimyo, but anyways, Naoe once again uses this great opportunity to deliver another banger one-liner.
Don't worry, I won't be alone. It'll be me and the shadows.
And that's the entire story we saw in the demonstration. Truly a masterpiece. In all seriousness, Naoe and Yasuke still feel like weird paper cutouts of real figures, despite there being theoretical potential for a maybe good story. If their characters aren't much deeper in the main game than just being black and a woman respectively, Ubisoft will have a very serious problem. But enough talk about how bad the story is probably going to be. Let's talk about how bad the stealth and parkour are most likely going to be. No worries, I will try to point out the few positive aspects as we go along. Let's start out with the stealth system. At first glance, the stealth system seems to be much better. Naoe has quite a few new and interesting skills. First of all, she can turn off light, Splinter Cell style, and she also has this Splinter Cell mechanic of being able to conceal yourself in darkness, whereas light is making it harder to conceal your character. This is a new thing for the Assassin's Creed series, by the way. She can also carry out assassinations through thin walls, which also plays into this new light mechanic, as you can obviously see the silhouettes, the shadows of people through paper walls when there's light in the other room, and you can then assassinate them through the paper wall. She also has a snorkel, which she can use to hide underwater indefinitely. She can hide in beams like Sam Fisher, basically pull herself up and then pounce on enemies from the upper part of the room. She can also forcibly pull people into other rooms. She can take them into a chokehold and then pull them backwards towards somewhere. And she also has the ability to pull herself towards enemies and then immediately kill them. This was only shown in a short moment, so it wasn't talked about this much, but this was, in my opinion, the most noticeable change to the stealth system. Instead of having to actually run up to every person and assassinate it, like you needed to do it in Assassin's Creed, except for aerial assassinations before, you can now use this rope that Naoe has to pull her towards an opponent and she will immediately stab him to death. This allows you to carry out assassinations at a quite considerable distance from what we've seen so far. Another interesting aspect that wasn't talked about so much is that Ubisoft promised that there will be a weather system, and that the weather system is going to influence your stealth. They haven't said whether the story missions are going to change the weather, or whether it's going to happen naturally, but the weather is going to change. You will have different seasons. That's the most important part. And in winter, for example, there will be no leaves on the bushes, obviously, and you will need to look for new ways to sneak around with Naoe. And bonus will be that most people will be huddled around flames instead of doing their job because it's cold and they want to be warm. That also sounds interesting. Now, I have a major issue with all of this. All of this sounds really good, but the problem here is that it doesn't seem challenging. Assassin's Creed already had a bit of an issue with making stealth halfway interesting because it just didn't create enough of a challenge in recent titles. And you couldn't one-hit people because they were level 60 and you were level 1, but that's another topic. And with all of those new abilities, Ubisoft hasn't shown us that the AI is much smarter now all of a sudden. If Naoe has all of those really cool and interesting sounding skills, the AI needs a way to counter them, otherwise the stealth is just going to be extremely bored. I was in all the Assassin's Creed titles as well, sometimes getting into that situation where I could easily clear out an entire level without even being seen, because the AI was just too stupid to actually react to you killing people all the time. There's this internal Assassin's Creed meme where you murder a guard and then you hide the body and suddenly everyone's forgotten the guard exists. Things like that need to be changed in time, because if you're going to add so many new abilities to Naui, which sound really cool, I don't want to take away from that, you need to make sure that your levels and that your AI are able to keep up with those new abilities. The stealth in Assassin's Creed is no longer the number one stealth in any kind of video game out there. Hitman has much better stealth these days. Dishonored had much better stealth. Assassin's Creed is really behind, and the issue isn't a lack of abilities in stealth. The issue is a lack of AI and a lack of the ability of your opponents to actually counter your own stealth. But that's just my opinion of stealth. Overall, there seem to be some cool abilities you have. You can obviously one-hit everyone, apparently now again, which is also really good. But I'm very concerned about the fact that the stealth seems to be even easier now and that you will most likely lose any real challenge while sneaking around, which will destroy any form of entertainment the game can provide, because if there's no challenge, there's no entertainment. A lack of challenge is also the main issue of the parkour systems for AC Shadows. What we have seen so far has only two positives. First of all, you have the rope, which seems cool, and secondly, you have a faster movement for Naui, which is also good. Parkour should be fast, but everything else seems very bad. You see, in all of the footage we've seen so far, it seems like someone is just holding the go forward key and the jump key and maybe the sprint key on whatever controls they're using, and now is just doing all of those tricks without any additional input. Now, really successful and really good parkour games, like for example Mirror's Edge or Dying Light, have many more opportunities to control your character, and that's important. I know those games are first person and this is a third person game, I understand the difference, but the point I'm trying to make is that in all of those games you can do more tricks and they force you to actively input something. You can, for example, do wall runs, which you never could do in the Assassin's Creed series. You can quickly have your character move around corners. Instead of just jumping forward over a street, you could have your character quickly pull themselves around the corner and they would use that momentum to run the corner. And all of those things forced you to stay focused during your parkour, in addition to adding a certain level of adrenaline to your parkour. By, for example, Dying Light is the best example for that, where you have basically infected the game's zombies running after you. You are suddenly forced to solve all of those parkour puzzles, and this will be the next important point, at a very quick pace, because there are enemies coming after you, and they will basically savage you to death if you slow down. So you need to quickly look for opportunities, quickly run around this corner, or if maybe it's a dead end, or you need to quickly jump here, you need to do a lot of stuff very quickly, and it creates this excellent atmosphere of adrenaline pumping and of you being forced to be laser focused on the parkour, and the parkour feels really good because of that. Whereas Assassin's Creed has had the issue that the parkour is getting ever easier and easier and easier and easier, and people are getting ever more annoyed with the parkour. Obviously, AC can throw it out, and they just try to simplify it even more without understanding what the problem is. The problem with the parkour is that the parkour lacks challenge. That's the exact problem. There are no puzzles to solve in the parkour anymore. In older AC games, you actually needed to look for ways up a certain rock face or something, because your characters couldn't just climb a blank wall on a house, for example. You needed to look for window sills or something your characters could grab onto. And then AC Syndicate, by the way, from Ubisoft Quebec, the developers of this game, this situation was completely thrown out, and your characters could just leap, jump, or use their grappling hook. And now you will have the same situation in AC Shadows. So you suddenly no longer have any real challenge in the parkour, and the parkour might look flashy, and it might look really fast, which is good, and the rope will basically allow you to bypass most of the parkour probably, but you'll lose any and all interest in the parkour. It becomes a boring way of just running from one place to another. The parkour loses the specialty of you being on a roof and having to actually do some cool parkour moves, because it's basically just holding X and sprint button, holding whatever your jump button is. I'm speaking from a PlayStation controller experience. Holding whatever your jump button is, holding the sprint button, and just going forward. And your character just does everything. And it's the same like running on the street, basically. The difference is that your character is jumping around in interesting ways, and that's the only difference to just running around, and it obviously feels boring. And this is also why I dislike this improved flashiness of the movement of Naui, because it seems like it's just an attempt to hide the real problem. She's jumping around like a hyper-aggressive Duracell rabbit on crack, basically, but the issue is that there is no substance to all of this, and this makes me doubt the parkour is going to be any interesting. If Naoe's gameplay at least looked interesting at times, Yasuke's gameplay looks like one big dumpster fire. I was waiting for some message in the lower right corner like Fuse killed the hostage, followed by some random slurs in voice chat, while I was looking at the Yasuke gameplay. Maybe if the daimyo would have hired Castle to protect his walls, he wouldn't be killed by Yasuke. In all seriousness, the combat looks really, really bad, and it doesn't look like Assassin's Creed, it looks more like Rainbow Six Japan at times. The first issue is the sword fighting. The sword fighting is a cheap rip-off from Ghost of Tsushima. I say this mainly for two reasons. First of all, the camera work. The camera work is clearly inspired, quote-unquote, by Ghost of Tsushima in the sense that it tries to create this feeling of an epic duel like you would see it in a Hollywood samurai movie, in the good ages of Hollywood, not in modern-day Hollywood. And this is done by Ghost of Tsushima in a really good way, and it's done really badly by Assassin's Creed Shadows. And then you also have the focus on duels, which you also had in Ghost of Tsushima, once again done really well, and now you have it in AC Shadows done really badly. I'm really surprised by why Ubisoft actually wanted to rip Ghost of Tsushima off, quote-unquote, because they must have known that people would notice and compare the two games, and it's not a comparison that AC Shadows is going to win once it releases. I'm 100% sure of that. Mainly because Ubisoft doesn't understand what makes Ghost of Tsushima's gameplay so good. It's not the fact that the camera looks nice, it's not the fact that the focus lies on duels instead of fighting larger groups of enemies. The reason for the success is the different stances, I would say. It's the gameplay itself, in a way. You need to change stances all the time to defeat your enemies. Whereas in the gameplay in Ghost of Tsushima, we see in AC Shadows, we see a situation where all you do is block and punch, and then you rinse and repeat until either Yasuke dies or the enemy dies. And this is a problem because you misunderstood what made Ghost of Tsushima so good. You basically just do bad combat and you try to hide it by having fancy camera work. It's not going to help the fact that the combat is really bad. Another new addition that Ubisoft made that won't really help the combat be more interesting is that they added an armor system. You need to slice off armor pieces from enemies if they're armored, and this seems like just a way to hide the health bar, because in all the combat we've seen so far, all that happens is that Yasuke blocks and attacks, and when he attacks often enough, the armor falls off. There seem to be no special moves or anything to get rid of armor. There seem to be no opportunities to attack unarmored weak spot. All you do is you just punch the enemy until the armor falls off. It's like a health bar. The difference is instead of punching an enemy until the health bar is empty, you punch an enemy until all the pieces of armor have fallen off. This doesn't change the core problem of the enemies being bullet sponges, it just hides it in an aesthetically more pleasing manner. But that's all we've seen from the sword fighting so far. The next issue is the storming of the castle. Yasuke can now barrel through thin walls. This is why I call this Rainbow Six Siege gameplay. And he can also use his Portuguese firearm to shoot people almost shooter style, because he can reload it at such a quick pace that it's almost like playing a shooter, in the sense that he basically just uses maybe 3 seconds for his reload animation and he immediately can fire again. This is also why I call it Rainbow Six Siege gameplay. It feels like you're almost playing a very bad shooter set in Japan instead of playing Assassin's Creed, and this is an issue because the stealth gameplay is most likely not going to be all that good. I explained why, mostly because there will be no challenge. If there's no challenge, stealth becomes boring because you're sitting in a bunch of bushes waiting for people to pass by. But if there's no challenge in sneaking, it just feels like you're doing nothing, and that feels boring, understandably. Whereas with Yasuke, you will at least be able to quickly barrel through a castle and shoot people with your weird Portuguese gun, which can be reloaded at such a quick pace, and this will be more interesting than sitting in some bushes. This might lead to the situation that Yasuke will be more popular than our shinobi, Naoe, despite the outrage, mostly because Yasuke is probably the best character to get around as much Assassin's Creed Shadows gameplay as humanly possible, and AC Shadows will most likely be one of those games where you will be finished with the game, where you want to be finished with the game as quickly as possible, while having to deal with as little gameplay as humanly possible. Which shouldn't be your goals for a video game, but AC Shadows will be a game like that, and I believe that Yasuke's gameplay shows that he will be the ideal character to get around most of AC Shadows content. But enough about the specific gameplay styles of Naoe and Yasuke, respectively, barreling through walls and being offensive and sneaking around. Let's talk about how Assassin's Creed Shadows is going to make use of its two main characters. AC Shadows will make absolutely no use of the two main characters. First of all, there will be no co-op. Obviously, we never saw it in Assassin's Creed, but having two main characters would be actually an excellent opportunity to maybe add co-op if you took care of your fans a little. That would be a very cool feature, but we obviously won't receive that. The AI is very stupid, like in any other Ubisoft game from what we've seen, so obviously you will also not be able to run around with both the characters. You will only be able to switch between them in every part of the open world, like you used to be able to do it in AC Syndicate, but then you lose the value of having two main characters, right? If I have two main characters, I want to be able to use both of them at the same time on a mission. And from what we see, there also won't be any ability to use them in a scripted situation. We didn't have that in AC Syndicate, the game which was also developed by Ubisoft Quebec, so we most likely also won't see it in Assassin's Creed Shadows. What I mean by being able to use the two main characters in a scripted manner would, for example, be when we need to assassinate a daimyo in this castle. We could have Yasuke play Rainbow Six Siege in the courtyard, and while he's doing that, you can use Naoe to actually sneak into the castle and kill the daimyo while Yasuke provides some form of distraction by, well, fighting in the castle. But we don't have situations like that. And the fact that we haven't been hearing about such situations, the fact that we haven't been shown such situations, makes me believe that the two main characters are basically going to be a waste, just like they were in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, which was also made by Ubisoft Quebec, and where the two main characters were also wasted because you were never able to use the two of them at the same time, even if the idea in theory would be really cool. Even with Yasuke's horrible gameplay, having him as a kind of living distraction while Naoe does some kind of stealth would be a cool way to combine the talents of the two characters. But from what we see, it won't be utilized, and that's the important point to keep in mind. Alright, that should be basically everything we know about the game, or have already seen. Oh, there might be a housing system, but Ubisoft was too busy talking about the sexual orientation of our main characters to tell us more about that topic, or any other relevant topic concerning the game, frankly. Before you ask, I have already forgotten which character swings which way. It was probably something more exotic because it sparked some internet outrage, but it really doesn't matter. My greatest concern is that this seems like another piece of bland Assassin's Creed cookie-cutter trash. It probably won't be unplayable levels of bad, it will just get extremely boring after a few hours, just like Valhalla. The reason why AC Shadows will start being boring after a few hours is because it will lack any meaningful story, side quests, characters, or gameplay, where the open world will be large and beautiful, but will end up feeling bland and empty, because Ubisoft just can't make any good open worlds anymore. All of this, paired with the extreme internet outrage due to Ubisoft introducing a Black Samurai, might make this the first mainline Assassin's Creed game that isn't financially profitable. Ubisoft's shares have already been doing badly, and if investors lose their last shreds of confidence into Ubisoft's biggest cash cow, the company might finally be sufficiently weakened for a hostile takeover. My conclusion is that you shouldn't buy AC Shadows for any price above $20 to maybe $25, because you're unlikely to get more than 20 hours of horribly mediocre entertainment from this game. If you are interested in gaming overall, I would still carefully watch this game. Firstly, because it is one of the last major attempts of the American left to push their ideology into global gaming, and secondly because Ubisoft's fate as a company hinges on this game's success. Alright, this would be all from me. What do you think about AC Shadows? Don't forget to leave a comment, like, share and subscribe. Cheers!